Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to one more episode of DojoLIVE, connecting experts like you. And as ever, we have Tulio Siragusa, my fellow teammate in Los Angeles. How you doing, Tulio? It's a pleasure to have you here as ever.
Pleasure's mine. Good morning. Excited for our call today.
Likewise here, Tulio. And last but not least, and this is Carlos, your host here in Mexico City. And today we're going to be speaking with Mike Volpe, CEO of Lola.com. And Lola is an agile travel management platform. And he's going to be telling us all about it today. And Mike, well, it's a pleasure to have you here, and welcome to today's show.
Thanks a ton for having me. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we look forward to it too here, Mike. Okay. Well, Mike, I usually start off these conversations by just asking a couple questions. Can you please tell us, and the audience, of course, a little bit about you and a little bit about Lola, how it came about, and of course, how it came about with the name.
Yeah. Let's get into that. That'll be a fun thing to talk about. So I've worked in the tech industry for a real long time. And at software companies, and usually marketing and business development and some sales related roles for a long time. I actually started my career though in finance, and I think we'll maybe come back to that a little bit later. But I've worked in software and tech for a long time, including I was part of the founding team at HubSpot, which is a company that has grown a fair amount. I was there from the very beginning through the IPO and afterward for a little while, and part of growing that. That was a lot of fun. I ran marketing and part of the sales team at a cybersecurity software company called Cybereason for a couple years. And then I just joined here at Lola.com a couple months ago. And we're sort of the answer to the boring, annoying corporate travel agency and corporate travel software. We feel like that the whole world of corporate travel has not kept up with things on the consumer side. And a gentleman named Paul English, who's one of the co-founders of Kayak, decided to set off and start a company that was attacking the business travel problems, and I joined just as CEO about 2 months ago. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike, for elaborating on that. Well, next thing I would like to ask you, Mike, is your chosen topic. I understand that you chose to talk about career paths. So we're going to be talking about from CMO to CEO. So can you tell us a little bit about why you chose this particular topic and how is this relevant to the travel tech industry?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that I don't know that the historically sort of typical career path of a CEO would have been to come up through marketing. But I think increasingly, I think it's actually a really great place to be from if you're a CEO. More and more, I think that marketing is responsible for revenue generation and really driving like a lot of the financials behind the business. And I think as that happens, and this whole shift to the internet that's happened in the past couple decades, and the importance of product and really lightweight experiences for your users, whether they're businesses or consumers, that having a marketing background is really I think advantageous for a lot of CEOs. And I think especially in all those trends around products becoming more consumer friendly. So I think typically 10 or 15 years ago, the products that a business would use were really probably had very bad user interfaces, weren't sort of consumer quality products, things like that. A lot of that has really shifted, and that is absolutely happening in the travel industry as well. That's one of the sort of changes that we're tapped into here at Lola.com, is that the software that you use for your business shouldn't be any harder to use than the software that you use in your personal life. And I think that those kind of things sort of really have started to really impact the travel industry. And I think that you'll start to see a lot more CEOs with some strength in marketing as part of their background.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. Okay, well, questions are starting to form inside my head, but
let's talk about the name. I don't think we.
That's right.
Yeah, you would ask me about that earlier. So
it triggers like this song in my head,
I know. Yeah. It's funny. So I accepted the job, and people start texting me like lyrics from the Kinks and all sorts of.
Right.
It's totally. That's definitely like the corporate theme song, absolutely. But no, it's interesting. So we had a couple of people that we worked with on the branding side. And, of course, in this day and age, it really helps to have a short, memorable name. I'm also a big fan of names that you can fill with meaning, and the name can kind of change and evolve over time. So I think that, let's say, actually a classic example, Salesforce. So at the time that Salesforce.com started, that was actually a great name for what they did. But now it's almost like they almost struggle against it because they bought an e-commerce company. They're bought all these other companies. They have Heroku, which is, like AWS. There's all these things they're doing that name doesn't really make sense for anymore. So I think it's always really good to have names that can kind of evolve their meaning over time as you grow and change as a company. So not to be, the corporatetravel.com, but to be Lola.com, I think is a good approach to it. And the name actually came from obviously availability of URLs and domains and things like that, but longitude and latitude, LOLA.com, right? And obviously related to travel. So there is like a subtle story behind it as well. And when you tell people that, they're like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense to be like travel related and to be longitude and latitude. But what I also love about it is it's just kind of its own name. And I think as we grow and change and adapt as a company, the name will kind of grow and change along with us.
So I never thought it was sort of an acronym.
It sort of is, yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Lola, I like it. I like it. Very strategic how that came about.
And we already have a theme song, so.
Exactly.
So Tulio, do you want to take the mic?
Yeah. I have a few questions about Lola, but before we do, I want to kind of go back to the comment you made about transitioning from a CMO to a CEO. It's interesting in tech over the past 30 years. It's gone in two different ways. Like it's been, you got to be an engineer to build a tech company, and then no, you need a marketer, and then you got to go back to being an engineer, especially if you're doing AI and such. And I sat through this presentation at a conference not too long ago where Mr. Wonderful was talking from the Shark Tank, and I found it fascinating that he took on an investment which was kind of a Me Too, a commodity product, but wanted to test out and prove the value and importance of using modern techniques for marketing, as in social media, influential marketing, and was able to prove extraordinary results for a product that would normally be just basically another Me Too or a commodity. And he made a solid case for how important it is to really know how to market your product. And I started thinking, well, it seems to me that we're kind of back to the idea that perhaps having a strong marketing background as a CEO is not a bad thing. What are your thoughts? Is that your thinking there? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's really fascinating, and I'd actually love to check out that presentation. I think for a lot of companies that's very much true. I think that in the world of software and tech, you need to kind of divide it between things that are really cutting edge, like hardcore tech, where having that technical background is probably super important because what you're doing isn't well understood by the whole world, through to, normal applications that are no longer rocket science to build, right? And are much more, I don't want to call them commodities because I think there's a fair amount of differentiation there. I think there's a lot of ways that we approach things differently. But it's not like there's a whole lot to the technology that we have that is, requires a PhD to really like fundamentally understand how it works and what the business value is. And I do think that a lot of it boils down to execution on the sales and marketing side. Like, I think that people like to buy products that have a brand that they believe in, like to buy products that they know a lot of their other peers are using. And I mean, I could dig into my email and Slack channels and list out 40 companies that are all claimed to be doing something like what we're doing here at Lola.com. But the only ones I worry about are the ones that are sort of starting to get a lot of traction in the sales and marketing side, because it's, in this day and age, not hard to kind of slap a little bit of a product together and put up a website. It's much, much, much harder to get meaningful traction on the customer acquisition side and start to get that sort of brand going and positive word of mouth going, because you've got a lot of happy users. So I think for a lot of companies that's true. I think for more cutting edge scientific stuff that's being spun out of a lab and things that people haven't done before, then I think having a highly technical CEO probably makes a lot of sense.
Interesting. Speaking of the value that the product is providing the market, can you just walk us through what is unique about Lola and what are you solving that's not being solved from the giants in corporate travel like American Express, for example, right?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. So typically in the world, on the software side of things and on the service side of things, I'll talk about those two things separately. So, if you're a company and you're working with, one of the really big TMCs, you're probably using software from Concur, which is now SAP, that was built a couple decades ago and is both really expensive and has a very long implementation time. And we've just found that most, not the biggest enterprises, like the Fortune 500 are always going to use big, complex, expensive solutions. But for mid-sized companies, they want something a lot more lighter, faster, and more agile. And you can, within 5 minutes, set up your complete corporate travel policy within Lola. It's just like a few clicks. You answer a couple simple questions. And then you just upload a list of all your employees. They all get an invite to download the mobile app, and instantly they can start to book all their travel. The finance team knows that the company's money is being spent wisely, and they get the visibility that they're looking for into how money's being spent. And then for the individual users, they have a super friendly mobile app and also a web app if they want to use it that way. And they get 24/7 support from our concierges that respond in under a minute. We do offer phone calls, but we find that the smaller, lighter, more agile companies typically prefer to text. So over 90% of our support is actually done via text. And that's 24/7. So I think if you were to redesign the sort of like old school travel agency, the old school corporate travel agency for 2018, it would be what Lola.com is. So it's super fast, lightweight, agile. The other interesting innovation that we have is most of those systems, the ones that you were talking about, charge you all of these fees every time you book, rebook, cancel, change, whatever. We don't do that. So right now we just have an annual subscription for the whole business, and it's completely flat fee based. And what that does is it really allows the businesses to much more easily budget and understand. I know a lot of businesses really often get surprised by all of a sudden they get a bill for a couple $1,000 for a whole bunch of change fees and hotel related stuff from their employees traveling. And the employees don't necessarily know that every time they call, it could be like $50. So there's a bunch of ways, a bunch of things we do, but that kind of it gives you a little bit more detail, but it's the perfect like light, agile, fast, lightweight sort of travel agency for the modern world.
Who's predominantly your end user? Is there a generational gap between? I mean, it sounds like millennials will be all over this, right? But is there? Are you noticed any generational gap with some of those guys used to the old fashioned?
Yeah, I'd say a little bit sometimes. So I'd say that we definitely have a lot of success with companies that are more faster adopters of technology. They use things like, Slack and other types of messaging internally, collaborate on Google Docs, not, emailing around Word docs, things like that, because they're more embracing of technology. And I do think that there's some customers that, if they are a little bit more old school, tend to rely more on their EA to do a lot of the booking. And we do actually have features that allow like an EA or an office manager to book on behalf of like multiple employees using their profile. So I'd say our more old school users end up using it probably through like an EA or an office manager, but increasingly we see tons of people just being hands-on in themselves. Like, I'm a CEO, I do have an EA office manager who helps me with a bunch of stuff, but frankly, the amount of time it would take me to like tell her the travel that I need versus clicking a couple buttons and buying a flight in like 45 seconds, I actually usually do most of my own because I'm in my mid 40s and I've grown up with a lot of technology and I just find it easier to do a lot of that stuff myself.
Yeah, I hear you. I remember being in the big four consulting world, and I was traveling 4 of the 5 days of the week, and I wish I had this kind of technology because it would have made life a lot easier back then.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, and it's one of those where like to book a flight, I really don't need to talk to another human. It's just like I find the flight I want, a couple clicks and I'm done. Now, if a flight gets canceled, I need to change things or I need to call the hotel to make sure they hold the room or things like that. That's where messaging, like, all the VIP support people that we have comes in. So you can get some help that way. But Yeah, I think in this day and age, people are used to a lot more self-service. It sort of goes back to like, you don't see the bank teller anymore. You go to an ATM, and today you don't even go to the ATM. You just do it in the mobile app, and that's kind of that trend that we're riding within the travel world.
Yeah, I think what's great about self-service, it's always consistent service because you're the one providing it for yourself. I want to go back to the topic of how you chose to go from a CMO role to a CEO. But before I do that, just curious about how are you going about validating features and functionality for your roadmap? Do you have a user base that's sort of like your most, the eyes and ears? How are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've always found that in software, the great thing about software is you can constantly change it and grow it and adapt it. And what that means is you just need to be really, really just customer obsessed. And so we've got, a few hundred companies that use the software, and we're constantly talking to them. And for us, there's really two sides. There's like that sort of person in the finance department, usually controller or director of finance, that's setting up the policy and doing a lot of the reviewing of looking at the reports and things like that of what people are spending money on. And then there's the individual traveler side, and they're, booking trips, taking trips, and, doing that whole piece. So we talk to both of those separately. We actually have product managers that are dedicated to each of those audiences. And I even try to make it not just the product team's responsibility, but I've done 2 meetings this week with directors of finance with our product manager, where we actually went into their office, sat down with them. Okay, show us what you use right now. What do you like and not like about it? What have you bought at other companies? How'd you think about this purchasing decision? What do you like about our product? What do you not like about it? All that stuff. And we document all that, and then we actually share it out with the whole company as well. I think that the more you can get into the mindset of your customers, the more important it is. And it's really that kind of feedback that basically fuels the entire roadmap. Awesome.
So I'm fairly new to travel myself. When I say new to travel, our company, Nearsoft, has been supporting the travel tech industry for over 11 years. I think almost 30% of our business comes from those kinds of companies. And I'm traditionally been more in media and entertainment, finance, and so on. So I've learned so much, and amazing how incredibly complex some of the logistics systems in the back end are. They remind me of very complex supply chain system. It's all built in there. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of transferable knowledge here into this space. I'm curious, what made you choose to go into travel, and what's the experience been like for you so far?
Yeah, it's interesting. So all that stuff you're just talking about, we should dive into, because I didn't know any of that before I arrived here. And I have learned what I feel like is a lot, but I'm sure is only like a little bit of it. But we should dive into that stuff because it's way more complex than most people think from the outside. So what I loved about Lola.com as a company was, first off, it's a gigantic market. Something like 1.3 or 1.5 trillion dollars is spent on business travel every single year. The opportunity to do a better job of managing that and providing better experiences for the travelers is just a gigantic opportunity. Most of the people I talk to sort of echo the comments you had earlier, which is that they feel like the existing solutions are kind of a prior generation of technology, and they're interested in trying something new. And the opportunity, Paul English has a gigantic reputation and a huge following, especially here within the Boston tech industry, but also more broadly in travel because of what he did with Kayak. So the opportunity to be able to partner with him and have him be able to focus on the product and engineering side of things, and I can focus on finance and sales and marketing, was an awesome opportunity as well. So to me, it boiled less, to be honest, about, looking around for something within the travel industry. Paul is someone I've known because we both have worked in the tech industry in Boston for a long time. And when he reached out, I really jumped at the opportunity to work with him. And then as I started to dig into travel, I was like, wow, this is a fascinating industry with a lot of depth and complexity to it, and an opportunity to build a really big company around it.
Yeah, it's engineers love working on it because it's very complex systems, and the user experience is such a critical component to all this. Especially in corporate travel, I'm assuming probably one of the success you have is the consumer grade sort of experience that you're providing versus that traditional clinical kind of corporate look and feel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we've got the original, one of the top designer from Kayak. We've got Paul here. We've got a few other people from that team. So everything we've done here, it's like it's definitely taking a consumer approach, and especially on the business traveler side, because I think in everyone's head, it's like they love to have the person that they can call on 24/7, but the software they use, they want it to be more like Kayak or something like that. So yeah, it's that's definitely the approach we're taking. But you're right that the back end of like the core infrastructure within the travel world is far older than I think most people realize. Like there's basically still a ton of technology that was built in the late 60s that's still hanging around, right? Like a lot of the GDSs and things like that are still, there's been upgrades and some changes, but at the core, like a lot of that stuff is actually still pretty old.
Yeah. Well, let's change it.
Yeah, let's do it. I agree.
So I promised to go back to the original topic. And what's it been like for you transitioning from the CMO role to the CEO? What's that experience been like so far? Any lessons you're learning along the way?
It's been great. I mean, so many lessons, but so it's been great so far. I'd say one big lesson is that as a marketer, you're sort of always aware of like communication as an important thing, because you're constantly communicating with the market and your customers and things like that, your sales team. But you almost maybe don't think about how much communication you have to do as a CEO. And even though we're not a big company, we're about 50 people, and it's been a lot of my time has been communicating with internal employees, whether it's emails and Slack posts and other stuff that's, that type of internal communication, or speaking in a company-wide meeting, or working with the whole management team, or even a lot of one-on-one meetings and small, 2, 3, 4 person meetings and lunches and coffee and things like that with all the employees. And you can spend a lot of time, and it's well worth the time, but you can spend a lot of time just collaborating and communicating with employees to make sure everyone's aligned on the strategy, make sure you have an understanding of what's happening, all the different parts of the business. It's been much more communications intensive for me than maybe I expected, from the outside. So that's definitely been one change. But again, something that I think the marketing background really helps with. But that's definitely been kind of like one surprise.
Yeah. Over the past 30 years, I've seen a shift from the command and control type of leadership that used to be in place. I call it the imperialistic leadership that's like a dinosaur today. And then you have organizations like ours, which are freedom-based organizations, self-managed. And culture becomes critically important. Can you talk to us about the culture you're sort of creating there, and what's working and what's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. And if you do it right and empower people, but also keep people aligned, you can accomplish so much more than you can in the command and control model. It's definitely harder to do. You need to spend a lot more of your time sort of focusing on having the right people in the right place, like culture and things like that. So a couple of the aspects of our culture, one is that we try to be like constantly evolving and sort of have this very iterative, sort of always improving nature to us. I think that's really important, especially in the software world where you can actually fix and change your product on a daily basis. Having that kind of mentality, I think, is really important. That's the first thing. And that applies not only to the product, but also our internal processes and even individual people. Like we like to see to have people have personal goals for things that they need to be working on, and things that they need to be improving, and think of themselves as like this constant improvement projects and this constant iteration. So that's definitely one important aspect of our culture. Another aspect of our culture is really to be very team-based. So obviously people have individual goals, but little things that we do, like within our sales team, obviously they're all measured individually, and you could, stack rank them and who was the best sales rep this month, things like that. But what we try to do to fight against that individual mentality is all of the contests and like special promotions and things like that that we do for the sales team are all team-based. So there'll be teams of sales reps that are competing with each other, and we change those teams up too. So little things like that try to help you have much more of a collaborative team-based atmosphere. We like to say that sort of like individually, we try to be extremely humble, but like together as a team, we have some swagger, right? And it's that sort of mentality that I think helps a lot. And there's other aspects to our culture, but I think those two kind of go in alignment with the sort of more modern organization that you were talking about.
Wow, I love it. I love it. I can have a million more questions, but is it time for us to activate the chat bot, Carlos? See if there's any questions from the audience. We're kind of coming up on time.
Actually, we should like do it right now. So
okay, ready? Okay, here we go. You got to check this out, Mike. I coded this in T++, if there's even such a language.
Now, this is for the audience. If you have any questions for Mike, make sure you send them right here on Twitter.
Whoa, what happened? It's yellow. There must be a bug in the code.
Yeah, there probably is. There probably is. So we need to figure it out. I thought it was bug-free, but apparently it isn't. But anyway, if you have any questions for Mike, just make sure you send them right here on Twitter @DojoLIVE, and we'll read him back to Mike right here on the spot, and he can respond live. So, okay, here it is. It's fading out.
All right.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Hey, Carlos, any questions from our internal team watching?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Any questions from our internal team watching on?
Yes.
I'm looking at the Slack channel here.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, we have a question, Mike, from Jose Carlos. He's one from our guys from operations, and I'm just going to read it as it is. He says, hold on a second, let me get my glasses here. He says, fast forward 5 years, any predictions you would like to make about travel technology, artificial intelligence, etc., and what Lola might look like then?
Yeah,
great question.
There's a bunch of interesting things. So I think a few trends. So definitely AI, right? And definitely voice-based interfaces too. So you could imagine that 5 years from now, I probably put my AirPods in and they're connected to my watch, forget about even my phone. And as I'm walking through the airport, it's like, oh, gate update, like go to this gate instead. And then you say, oh, like client just called, I need to reschedule my flight. And it's like, okay, we know you love JetBlue, like here are the two options, and you're like, oh great, book that second one, fine, done, change. Like, I think it's gonna be much more of a dynamic sort of like process like that, much more likely to be a voice-based interface on that kind of timeline. And definitely like a lot more AI assistance. We have some AI that kind of adds a lot of leverage to the human-based agents that we have, but that stuff in that timeline is going to get a lot better. And not that humans will never be completely displaced, but the leverage that you get and the number of interactions that a human can have and like the amount of power that you can enable them with through using AI as a lot of leverage, I think will increase a ton. So that's at least some of the things that I think will be like cool and interesting over that kind of timeline.
Excellent, thank you. And there you have it, Jose Carlos. So there's your answer from the man himself. All right, so I think we don't have any more questions, Tulio, and I believe that
we're coming up on time. I have just one more question, Carlo, and then I'll pass it back to you. Any words of wisdom, anyone sitting on the fence, just sort of thinking about making that transition, that leap, from the second in command to the man or the woman in charge. Any words of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience?
I think, I saw something on Twitter the other day and I retweeted it, but it was something around that concept of imposter syndrome. And I think the important thing to remember is like everyone has imposter syndrome. And I think often the thing holding people back is holding people back from taking that next job up and sort of, being the person in charge is that sort of fear of imposter syndrome. And what I will tell you is all the CEOs I've talked to and my own experience so far is like, you never know everything. And it's like, you make decisions, you make the best decisions you can, but in your heart, you know that you don't have all the information. You're not totally sure about that decision. And so I wouldn't let that hold yourself back. I think is be the piece of advice. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not ready. And I thought for a long time, like I wasn't necessarily ready. And then having done it for a couple months, like, I think I was ready. And it doesn't mean I'm perfect. I'm probably screwing a lot of things up, but it's one of those things you constantly iterate and improve and try to get better every single day. And I think if you approach it with that kind of attitude and just display that as an example for your employees, then you'll be winning at least half the battle.
Well, thanks. I think having CEOs with a high level of humility is a key thing today.
Oh yeah, the most important thing.
Appreciate talking with you. It sounds like you've got this. We can go on for the next hour, but we're unfortunately out of time. But it's been a pleasure talking and connecting with you and learning more about you and your company.
Thanks a ton for having me. This is a lot of fun. I'll chat with you guys soon.
Okay, Mike. Well, the only thing left for me to do is just simply send you a big heartfelt warm thank you for having been with us today. And before we go off the air, I just want to make a quick announcement, real quick, about next week. And gentlemen, for those if you're watching next week here on DojoLIVE, we are going to be speaking with Anna Schlegel, the head of Product Portfolio Solutions and Information Engineering and Globalization at NetApp. So that should be interesting. We still don't have the topic yet, but it's going to be around basically the applications world and everything that it entails. And again, well, Mike, I'm just going to, again, thank you for your time, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And I'm going to ask you to, once we go off the air, just can you stick around for a minute with us so we can chat and wrap it up off the air, okay? So without further ado, again, thank you for having me with us here on DojoLIVE, connecting experts like you. Until next week, this is Carlos Ponce in Mexico City. Goodbye.